What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of interAXEtion. Today we're going to talk hemiolas, atonal music, overdrive and distortions, and relative major and minors. What exactly is a hemiola? Second question, what is the difference between playing atonal and playing outside? Thanks. A hemiola is basically a 3/2 rhythm. Okay, and you'll see it a lot in 3/4 or 6/8, and you'll see it a lot at the end of phrases or the end of ideas or motives, and it's basically changing from an eighth note feel to a quarter note feel, or like a quarter note triplet kind of feel. Kind of would make a lot of sense if you've ever been chugging along on a riff and then you end it with a quarter note triplet. Ta-da! You just did a hemiola. So essentially, if you're going 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, that essentially is a hemiola. Now, as to the atonal and outside questions, playing atonally is not the same thing as playing outside. All right, you'll upset some jazz players, and you'll probably upset some classical composers. Atonal stems from the classical world, and serialism, the 12-tone rows, atonal music. That's where that comes from. And there's usually a set of rules that you follow that kind of break all the normal rules of music that we know of, and you have no key center. And you usually play with chord clusters or interval clusters or a row of tones that you can flip upside down and backwards and use that to generate your ideas. And playing outside refers to more of, say, like the jazz world or the improv world when you're playing over chord changes. And playing outside really just means you're adding outside tensions or altered tones to create a tension and then resolve it or release that tension back to the chord you're landing on. You see it a lot over dominant harmonies, because you can augment and diminish fifths and augment and diminish the seconds to get the flat 9 or flat 5 kind of thing going on. And those are outside tones, and they usually resolve to a note of the chord that follows. And that's how you want to use it, and that's how you want to try to apply it. I know that's just scraping the surface on that topic because it's pretty heavy, and it's a little above my head because I'm not that good at it. But one day. Next question. What is the difference between overdrive and distortion in general? I'd like to know what are the different guitar settings and modification and all this other stuff that I'm not going to answer. But overdrive and distortion, they are different things, and they're basically different levels of distortion. You can think of overdrive as, I'm going to overdrive my clean channel and get some breakup, right? Give it a little grit, give it a little grime. You can also use an overdrive pedal in front of, say, a high gain amp, with essentially the drive turned way down, so you're just basically boosting the volume that's going into your amp, overdriving your tubes amps a little bit more and kind of tightening it up with the tone knob. Distortion is kind of its own beast and it has its own sound, and you're not going to use the distortion pedal in front of a high gain amp, right? Because the distortion pedal is acting like the high gain amp. And the overdrive pedal is just going to boost your signal a little bit more, give it a slight distortion, a slight grime. Distortion has its own pedal. If you're playing hard rock or metal, I would highly advise getting an amp that suits that need, not buying a distortion pedal. I've never been a fan of relying on the tone of a distortion pedal for a heavy sound. But I would use an overdrive pedal to overdrive my sound or boost it a little bit, because you get a wider variety of overdrives, at least maybe just I do, and how I would use them. So I hope that clears it up a little bit. If not, more questions down below. Next question. I play a 7-string in drop A tuning. I end up using A minor pentatonic or harmonic or melodic minor shapes, similar to Tool stuff in drop D. Can you explain how I can use A minor and C major scales together in writing songs? I believe one is called the relative minor, parent major, all that kind of stuff. So, yes, C major and A minor are the same scale. Every major key, C major in this case, has a minor key that's the same thing, and they call that relative minor. They're the same notes, okay? And if you have ever picked up your guitar and strum an A minor chord and then strum a C minor chord, you'll notice that they sound really good together. And that's essentially because they're the same harmony. You're not really moving anywhere. You'd have to play either the 2 chord or the 4 chord to kind of start taking a step forward and progressing harmonically. So that being said, since they are the same scale, and this is where a lot of confusion with modes comes into play, people think that, oh, I'm playing C major, so let me just play A minor all over everything. And that works, but it really only works if you're targeting notes of the C major chord, right? And this is where the line is blurry because, like I said, you go add an extra note to a C chord down below, a third below, and you get an A minor chord. So they're essentially the same chord, which is why so many people use that. You know, they're playing over a C major backing track, and they just solo an A minor pentatonic because all those notes are right and they all fit. So that's why you can do that. I don't want to get too much further into relative major and minor just because we don't have enough time. But if you have more questions about it, leave them down below. And that does it for this week's interaction. Okay, if you have any theory questions that are bothering you, you're confused about, and you don't want to Google, and you just want to take my perspective on it, that's awesome. Leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to either answer them in a video or answer them in the comments. Or I see a lot of other users will reply to people, and that's great. I love the discussion. If you have any gear questions, or life in general questions, that's cool too, even though there are great outlets online for that kind of stuff. But until then, I'll see you next time. So thanks a lot.